conversation on the very topic and the title, the book title, the publication on how to heal our divides. No doubt that this is relevant and timely, and we are joined by three of the contributors of this book this evening. This is part of the 3R series that we as Rumi Forum are launching to be a contributor, an asset for the ongoing depolarization work all over the country. So we call this 3R: restoration, reconciliation, resiliency, to highlight what needs to be done, what is being done, and what can be done. So this book perfectly fits into that description. It is a story of actual ongoing work of healing, bridge building, and helping our society to rediscover what it has and to discover, advance into what it needs to. So our moderator this evening is Alison Ralph, Associate Director of the Inclusive America Project at the Aspen Institute. Alison, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim, and thank you to the Rumi Forum for having me and us tonight. It's great to be with all of you. As Ibrahim said, I'm Alison Ralph. I'm the Associate Director of the Inclusive America Project at Aspen, and I essentially work to ensure that everyone has the same rights, freedoms, and safety to worship or not, according to their conscience. I am delighted to be here tonight with Dr. Jeff Burns of Pathways to Peace, the very honored Martin Brooks of Peace Catalyst, and Reverend Rich Tefel of Church of the Holy City. Their bios are on the program page here. So I'm not going to spend long introducing them. I'd rather just dig into what I hope is going to be a really lovely conversation. So Brian Mclaren's introduction to this book, How to Heal Divides, which of course my fuzzy background is not showing. That introduction is about bias and polarization and community, and it's about the choices that we poor, failing, or sinning, if you use that language, humans make to connect to or divide from each other as other human beings. The thing is that I was reading this book and I was struck by just how many of the chapters are about faith-inspired organizations or programs. In fact, nearly all of them are, including the 3 programs that you, my friends, have written. So there's among the 3 of you here, we have a DC church and 2 programs that build Muslim evangelical relationships. So questions for Martin and Jeff: is religion the center of your work because that's where the hurt is, or because that's where the possibility is? And for Rich, your chapter is about building leadership programs. So why specifically at a church? And I will start with either Martin or Jeff, whoever wants to go first.
Okay. Martin, you want to go first?
Well, I can do that. Is that we work with the churches partly because it's a Christian organization, but that, as you said, that's where there's hurt there. We have to acknowledge the hurt that has been done through, in the name of religion through the years. But I also believe that there's hope, incredible hope and possibility in working through church circles, through matters of faith. Jeff?
Yeah, I would say in terms of the possibility and the hurt, I think it's both, to be honest with you. There was a book a few years ago written by Dean Hammer, and it was called The God Gene. And the subtitle was How Faith Is Hardwired into Our Genes. So on a possibility side, he's saying that if you believe in evolution, holistic, meaning believe in it, just believe in evolution. He would say that we are hardwired genetically to believe in something transient. And he said the human race would not have survived without this genetic code. It's a lot of debate about it. And he said, because when people go through existential tragedies, if they don't have this genetic belief in something transcendent, helps them bond, endure suffering, and helps them to continue. So from my vantage point, I believe that all people are spiritual beings. And whether that's just from the evolutionary perspective, genetically, that means that that people are wanting something larger to fill their souls than what they're having. It's not being filled by drugs, sex, power, money. We see that. So they want something larger. So I see that as a possibility that we have some sort of answer, on a spiritual realm. I find that everyone I talk to is interested in spirituality. So I see it as a possibility. But I also see it as a hurt. We've tried in diplomacy, we've tried bringing in troops, the peacekeepers. Once they pull out, there's war, economics, incentives, and so forth. But for some reason, we leave out the spiritual solution. And I believe that spiritual solution, coming from my background, I'm a peacemaker in the way of Jesus, but that spiritual solution is based on love. And I think that this transcendence, whatever you believe it to be, has to be very loving. It has to be a very loving force or whatever it is. And I think it gives us a chance to address hurt, because without the spiritual and without love, there'll be no forgiveness. There'll be no restorative justice. There'll be no true healing. That's why we have to have troops and stuff. And I think Mandela, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, they all taught us this and showed us this. So from my vantage point, it is a possibility because it's genetics and because of the hurt. Humanity is hurting now, whether it's religious, whether it's secular. There's a lot of pain now, and they're not finding the answers very well.
Both of you.
I'll jump in too. Thank you, Allison, for that great question. And thank you to the Rumi Forum for inviting me. And Ibrahim, thank you for all the work you've done. We've done an event with Rumi Forum at our church, and you've actually joined one of my Sunday worship services and on the topic of Islam. So I really appreciate the partnership, and it's nice to meet Martin and Jeffrey tonight. And Allison, thank you for facilitating. And Mehmet for pulling the whole thing together and being a dad in the midst of all that. So thanks for all that. Most important job. And I just want to acknowledge what Jeffrey and Martin are doing. I served, it's interesting, there's a Muslim Christian thing here tonight too. I served as the head of that group for the National Council of Churches for a while. And one of the questions the Muslim groups asked me was, could you please call that pastor who's saying he's going to burn the Quran and tell him to knock it off? And I said, it was a great education of thinking that I could call this guy. He was on my speed dial, and it was a great example on my side, on our side too, what we think of Islam, just one monolithic thing.
Right.
One Muslim, they can call the other Muslim and solve it. So I really appreciate the complexity of what Jeffrey and Martin are doing. To answer your question, Allison, you asked specifically about what I'm doing and why leadership and why the church. And that's the question you're getting at. My program is basically, we call it spiritual entrepreneurism, and it's developing both your inner life and your outer life. So it would be developing your spiritual life, but it would be also marrying it up to how do you create that into a business? How do you create that into a nonprofit? How do you do your politics through it? Why the church or a religious institution? I believe that what we've lost in our culture right now in a secular culture is we've become disenchanted. We've taken away the enchantment of the soul, of the spirit, which I believe is at our core. And so what we've done is said, to be successful in our culture right now, it's to make a lot of money, have a lot of followers, have control over a lot of people, and have status in the culture, maybe celebrity status. So that's what our culture is teaching people. I don't think it's very satisfactory. I know that it's not satisfactory from a lot of the young people that I'm working with. Mm-hmm. That's not going to work. So the question then is, what about your inner life? We've forgotten about the inner life, the spiritual life. You can call it whatever you want, but there's something there. And that used to be a place that was formed in churches or mosques or synagogues. There was a process, and that's now pretty much out of the picture for most of the people I'm working with. But they're coming to me saying, this path toward status, celebrity, how many followers I have on Instagram, how many Twitter followers I have, that's turned out not to make me very happy. And I've made the money, and that's not turned out to make me happy. I have the office, I have the title, and they're so out of touch with their heart and their soul. I literally, when I ask them, tell me what you're passionate about, what do you love, what would you die for that's important, and they cannot articulate anymore almost what's inside them. That's the role of spirit. And so it's a shame that the religious communities have kind of lost connection with people. I don't think we're very relevant to young people right now because we talk about our spiritual life in an abstraction. So the spiritual entrepreneur program that we're doing at our church marries that together. It says, you want to develop an inner life, which is leading a good life, leading a moral life, doing the right thing when people aren't looking, and that you're here for a bigger cause, and you're doing soul work. That you'll be here for a period, but you'll be elsewhere for a much longer period. So, lead a good life. And it's not about retiring to a monastery, and it's about engaging in the world. So being involved with politics, being involved with business, how do you start a business? These are not being taught in churches at all. And that's what young people that we're engaging are really looking for. They're saying, what's an LLC? What's a C3? How do I get investors? How do I raise money? How do I put together a board? And I believe that faith communities need to be able to teach that as well. We need to combine these two worlds of the inner life, which is, in my tradition, I come from the Christian tradition, so it's going to be the Bible, the teachings of Jesus. And then how do you marry that to an outer life, which is engagement in the world and actually having tangible success in your life? And that's a life. That's a life. When you can have a deep inner life and you can have an impact in the world, that's a life well lived. And so that's why I think church is so important. That's a place to be doing this leadership training, because right now kids come to me and say, should I get an MBA or a divinity degree? And it's sad because it's bifurcated. And I want to say to them, I want you to be integrated, to be a whole person, develop your soul and your business and do it all.
Very good.
Do it all. It's there's so much to do now, right? There's all of us are, I think, feeling overwhelmed by the state of the world, which is nothing new, by the way. Ancient historian, that's been happening for multiple thousands of years, that we're overwhelmed by the state of the world. But we also are truly overwhelmed by the state of the world. And there's a lot of devastation and despair around us. And back to the sort of question of part of the first question that I asked is the church or the religious community being the location of both the hurt and the hope. And Martin, you said that's sort of why you're there, working with matters of faith. Is that can you expand on that a little bit for us? Tell us what it really means to be working on matters of faith, not just because you happen to be working with religious people, but in a whole religious sort of universe with whole communities.
Yeah, I think as Jeff said, there's some longing to connect to the transcendent, some longing to have purpose in life. And I grew up in evangelical conservative churches, and the churches offered that sense of belonging, that sense of community, that sense of I'm contributing to something larger than myself. And somewhere in the span of my lifetime, or maybe it was just my own personal spiritual journey, it seemed that the church got sidetracks. The focus has shifted to, or maybe I've just awakened to it. Shifted to more power dynamics. We need to have a strong group so that we can affect elections, so that we can protect ourselves from the outside world. And it became sort of seclusionary and identity based. You're with us or you're against us. And we define these lines and made these definitions based on a theology that, as I look at, Rich was talking about the younger generation, people coming behind us, and as I engage with recent graduates from university programs, that's frustrating to them. This polarization. The next generation doesn't seem to be inclined to fight the battles of their parents. They don't seem to be inclined to protect the institutions. So if they're going to step away from the institution, what is it that we can offer them as an identity? What is it that we can offer them that contributes to something transcendent beyond themselves? And people, even within theological circles, are having to decide, what is it that you will rally around? Is it politics? Is it the institution? And I kind of go back to Jesus, a quote from Jesus, when he boiled it all down, it's like, love God and love other people. So if we can bring people, and I realize most of the people on this call probably come from a Muslim or a Christian tradition, and we say love God, that communicates, but there are other people that define God even differently. But how do we connect to this transcendence, and how do we take care of the people around us? So in Peace Catalyst, we've talked about understanding the other, connecting to the other, and collaborating with the other. It's sort of a method that we use. And this understanding includes understanding ourselves and our own journey. We may, as a child, our parents said, don't touch the stove, it's hot, but when we get older, we learn to use that heat for good things. Our faith is, Richard Rohr talks about first half and second half of life, and how we create these strong containers early on that guide us, inform us in the later half of life. But now, how do we use this to understand each other, understand ourselves, to connect with each other, and then collaborate? And that's been one of the problems of my conservative Christian background, is this fear of, I'm going to be associated with something that's false doctrine, or it doesn't align with my beliefs. And if I participate in it, people will think, well, I'm promoting this thing, and because of that, there's been such a fear of that we've stepped back from even engaging with each other. We're not looking for areas where we can collaborate. We're looking for signs that the other person is wrong, a heretic, the other, and then we separate from them. So Peace Catalyst is trying to help people cross those lines of difference in a collaborative way. And I've said enough.
It's awesome.
Thank you, Martin. That sense of being, you mentioned that in the context of even the evangelical community, but specifically the conservative, I think, evangelical community. But that's also more and more in the last decade or so become a marker of progressivism as well. But if it's imperfect, it's like contagious. You don't want to touch it because you'll be infected by it. There's this sort of sense that you want to stay away from anything that isn't as good as you are, which once you get into the theology of that is, of course, extremely dangerous for the safety, for the wholeness of our communities. Jeff, I'm hearing you. There's a lot of nodding and humming over there, and I'm not sure. I possibly heard an amen.
Probably did. I have, yeah. Just building on what Martin's talked about. We both were. I was connected with Peace Catalyst for 4 years, right at the beginning, and we really focused on. Unfortunately, we were called the evangelical left. If you were a peacemaker, you were part of the evangelical left. And but we really believed in this concept of being a peacemaker in the way of Jesus. And that simply means, and I've boiled it down, I have 19 years of theological education. I'm not saying to brag, but I'm saying after all of that's been said and done, I have boiled the whole thing down to the core message of Jesus, which Muslims agree with. They agree with. This is in the Quran. This is, I've had no Muslim pushback on this. I've even spoken in synagogues and I've had no pushback on this. And that it is to love the Lord your God with all your heart or all your being, love your neighbors yourself, treat other people the way you want to be treated. And if you find enemies along the way, do everything within your power to make them your friends. So what I did when I started this journey, it was just me and my wife. In 2005, I was a little Muslim boy. I hated Muslims. I was an Islamophobe, and God turned my heart to a little Muslim child I met in Starbucks. It was an instantaneous meeting where my life was transformed. And from that day, I walked out and said, I renounce hatred and violence, and God, I'll be a peacemaker. I had no clue because there weren't many peacemakers at that time in the evangelical, in America, in that community. There were Mennonites and groups. And so I brought out and I thought, and I said, that's it. This is the core message, the Sermon on the Mount, that Jesus gave it. This, if we spend our time here, this will fill our life. This is large enough to fill our souls. So I didn't know what I was doing. So I started becoming friends with Muslims. And then we were eating together. We were doing dialogue meetings. We even did Jesus dialogues in the mosque. They were so open. I've never had any pushback from the Muslim community or the Jewish community that I've been around. I've never had any pushback from them. And I realized you can have the best mission statement or idea in the world, but if it's not practical, it's just an idea. And so when you say love your enemies, well, that's true, but it's just an idea. And one of the things I would run into Christians and they would say to me, well, Muslim, you can't be friends of Muslims. You can't trust any of them. I'll say, well, what does the Bible say about your neighbor? Love your neighbor. And it said, but there are enemies. I heard this so much. There are enemies. I said, well, if you believe that to be true, how are we to treat our enemy? And it's like circuit blowing, So I did a lot of walk people through deconstruction. And one of the ways that we began to do this, I would take pastors to the mosque and have dinner with imams. But a friend of mine, Mclaren, one day, she said, Jeff, you need to write down what you do. Because it became an organic thing, And so I thought, well, we become friends. And one of the biggest problems right now in our world is that people don't have one friend in the group they hate. That's one of the biggest problems. Become friends without a hook, eat together. And I would tell my Muslim friends and Jewish friends, if we just have dialogue meetings, but we're not eating each other's homes and our children playing together, it's just a nice talk. And then we would explore faith together. And I don't mean in a polemic way. We would talk about our common ground. And Jesus was a big basis of our common ground. And then we would talk about our differences. By that time, you're safe enough to ask the other the questions, but you're friends. And then the fourth thing was go do something in your community together for the common good. And when they did that, started building habitat homes and community gardens, everything began to change. And so I realized that a friend of mine told me recently, he's a pastor, and he said, Jeff, in my church, that's a mainline church, I can get up and talk about the LGBTQ question. And I get pushback, but not as much as you would think, because most people have an LGBTQ friend or a family member now. They're humanizing. They have a child. You would believe how many evangelical leaders come to me and said, my child is just admitted they're gay. But he said, when I bring up race or Islam or Muslims, they go nuts. And the thing is, they don't know a Muslim. They don't have an African-American friend. And so one of the things I've tried to do is and with Muslims is to create opportunities for friendship, create so many. And one guy was in my group and he goes, oh, well, I always would say to them, they'd say, I want to join you. I say, well, you're just joining a movement, not really joining me. And I said, what do you like to do? He said, I'd like to hunt and fish. I said, okay, we're going to let you, you're going to take Muslims hunting and fishing with you. And he did. And man, they had a ball. One guy was shy. He goes, I can't talk like you do, but I said, what do you got? He goes, I have a English as a second language certificate. So he started, we talked to the imam, he goes, we need help with this. So he started in his home teaching ESL. So what began to happen is through friendships and eating together and doing partnering. I think partnerships are key. If you cannot partner with the other, there's a big problem. There's a big problem. But once that barrier's down and you're working together in the community, you know what happens? People look at you and say, wow, there's something going on there. It's big. I want to be a part of it. I really want to be a part of this. But there's something wrong when people in religion say, I believe you should love your neighbors yourself. But what they mean by that, many times, are the people that go to my church. Even then, sometimes they have hard enough time loving them. And they can't love the other. They can't make peace with that. So that's how we did it. It's just that simple, over and over and over and repeated. And I kept the message simple. And that's Martin, same DNA, and I have so many Muslim friends and have partnered together. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you, Jeff. We have talked a little bit about just the fact that this work involves really difficult conversations, the kinds of serious conversations that probably many of us argued about over our Thanksgiving tables.
Yeah.
With, Uncle Donald or whoever your grumpy uncle might be. And I think I know a lot of us have learned to avoid those conversations because it's hard and it can break relationships once we have them. Jeff, you just went through okay, build relationships and do things together and then you're great. But even despite when we love each other and our families, we have deep and abiding love, and also we can't talk about these things. And yet somehow you three are talking about these things. So I'm curious, I guess 2 questions for all of you about these kinds of conversations. Number one, why have them if they're hard? And in fact, that sometimes they're going to turn out poorly, and by poorly, really bad. And the second part of that is what are your best practices for having those conversations successfully? And Rich, I'd like to start with you on this one.
Thanks, Allison. So why even have the conversation? I mean, there certainly are times when it's just a polite thing to kind of get through the meal. So I get that. But as a culture right now, we have very loud voices. I would almost call them screamers on both extremes of our political sides. And what they've done very effectively is they've intimidated most people. And I hear this all the time, and from students in college and so forth, saying, you know what? I've learned to keep my head down and keep my mouth shut. I'm not going to tweet anything. I'm not going to Facebook anything. I'm not going to put anything on my Instagram. I don't want to get fired. I don't want to get fired for being canceled from somebody on the left. I don't want to piss off somebody on the right who will, people I know in the conservative movement. If you say the wrong thing, we're watching it happen right now. We're silencing people we disagree with. That's a very dangerous tendency. It has very negative outcomes. It is one of the greatest threats, if not the greatest threat to our country right now.
Right.
We are afraid to talk to each other. We are afraid to speak our mind. And so that's dangerous. What happens in those situations is, first of all, we all begin to believe that the voices who are loudest are much larger than they are. We also begin to believe that the exhaustive majority of people don't exist. And I've discovered that when you disagree with somebody, and believe me, I've been in many of the toughest discussions that you could possibly have on these topics.
Yeah.
When you shame someone or cancel them or shout them down, they don't change their heart. What they do is they repress it. They just say, okay, you're not going to hear me. I'm going to resent you even more. You have not seen nor heard me, and this will appear in a different way. And when we can't communicate through words, we can't communicate. Politics is a beautiful thing, actually. It has a negative reputation, but it's the way we solve things peaceably. But when we can't do that, it will lead to violence. So it's extremely important to have the conversations. I could talk more about how you can hold them, but I think it's the most important thing is that we all need to keep in every opportunity we're given to be with someone we disagree with, to be curious, just to stop before we have to correct them and just listen and begin that pattern with each other. And I'll just acknowledge something here that's taking place now. You have two gentlemen who are white men with Southern accents who are saying they're evangelical. That's a group that's been very diminished and stereotyped as much as Muslims. And so they were saying that they, even in their own community, the courage of them to be a peacemaker is very risky. Ambassadors, crossing the enemy lines to have the conversation, it's a very risky role. So I want to say I admire both of them because they're probably playing one of the most key roles in our country right now. It's very easy when you live in a very progressive area to be in a progressive community and say you agree with this, that, and there's no risk to you. But someone who's taking a risk as a peacemaker, that's what we all need to follow. We all need to follow that risk and pattern it. So I can go into more of how we do it in the situations I'll do it. I'll end with one quick example. And that is that whenever I'm in a situation facilitating a discussion where there are different sides, I do give voice to the minority perspective, regardless of what the minority is. And that's very important. If you can do that, you can teach the group that's watching that they have minority views that they're not sharing. But if you're treating that person with respect and you're repeating back what they actually are saying and you're not cartooning them, then a person listening to the discussion who has certain viewpoints that they don't feel comfortable sharing, might be complicated, is thinking, okay, this is safe. When I speak my mind from my heart, I won't be shut down. And that's what people are really craving. And we actually do that in our church service. We, as much as we preach, we have a discussion and it's facilitated along those lines. So that would be some of the ways, but I think it's a great question, Allison, because I think it's one of the most important things we can do right now is we have to have these difficult conversations or it will take place in a different way.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, please, Martin, go ahead.
Well, Rich, I just want to thank you for naming the way many are responding to the evangelical community. I was on a call with Alliance for Peace Builders a few months ago, just after the January 6th storming of the Capitol. And, the evangelical community, within the evangelical community, there are many subsets. So it's a mistake to say evangelicals are this. Sure, there's some defining factors there. But one of the points that I was making with Alliance for Peace Builders is if we make even the conservative evangelical people or people who claim that title as the scapegoat, if we can just fix that group, then everything will be better. Well, then we'll just move on to the next group. And if we don't give, there were people who looked at January 6th and said, I don't know what that is, but that doesn't represent my faith within the evangelical community. So if you don't give those people an off-ramp, a better expression of faith, a face-saving way to take a step back from that and reevaluate it, if we don't give them this space, give us this space to say, I'm uncomfortable with what's happening, but I don't know what else to do. I need to think about this for a while. if the attacks come in intensity, then people sort of circle the wagons. They get defensive. The walls go up, and a group identity. There's safety in numbers. I don't know where I'm going, but I know where I came from, and we tend to retreat into our group. So what I'm thanking you for, Rich, is giving space for people in the evangelical community that are rethinking what it means. Where are the inconsistencies? Some of those have been exposed, and can we extend grace toward our own community? In my case, my own community, who I know is divided, and there are many subsets of that too.
Mm-hmm. That's good, Martin. Yeah.
Martin, thank you both, Martin and Rich, for that. I want to double tap on that topic just a moment. The idea that you were both speaking of, that if you shout someone down or close them off, their only response is to, as you said, Martin, circle the wagons and shut off. And so for those of us, and Martin, you also, sorry, Jeff, dang it, I'm going to start that one over. Rich, you said we need to be with people who are different from ourselves. And there's a sort of, I'm liberal. And so coming from the sort of liberal viewpoint, like, oh yes, I'm around all of these lovely people who are so different from me, except those people over there who think X, Y, Z. And that doesn't, as Martin just said, allow other people's space to figure out where they are in the world. And what essentially happens, this is maybe not exactly fair, but it's sort of a good metaphor, is that other people, the people who are being put down, sort of swallow the propaganda about them. So I'm a historian of ancient Christianity. It's happened, I think, in the Reformation between the Catholics and Protestants. Protestants said, oh, you Catholics, you just believe whatever the Pope tells you. And then it's like, yeah, it's a great idea. And there were all these councils that made the Pope stronger and stronger, and Catholics were like, yes, Pope, believe that guy. When in fact, the Catholic Church was much more diverse before then. So all of the shouting really made people run for their own camps and created divides that weren't actually there before that. And so you're both getting at this issue of the fear of being with people who are different from ourselves. Yeah. And this need to really give people space and grace for, maybe we call it redemption. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, and I can't speak for Martin, but we've had discussions before about there is a trauma side to this when you are a peacemaker, and especially when Jesus said, "A prophet's without honor except in his own country," in his hometown, whatever. And there's a lot of that kind of thinking. But somewhere along the way, I mean, with these conversations, I'm an avid bodyboarder. I live near the ocean. There's a part of me that says, God, why don't you, I'm also a life coach. Just be a life coach and just fade away from this. I mean, you fought the battles, you've done all this stuff. But then I think my daughter is half African-American. And what kind of world do I want to leave for her? And I've learned that and there's a time and a place for conversations. There are people that are foolish. In other words, if you might be the brother at Thanksgiving that really is more there to just argue. He's more, or she's more there to just, you know what I mean? And sometimes you just have to say, look, we don't agree on this, and I think that's okay to some degree. But what I have tried to do over the years is let people talk. I ask questions, and I'll see when you've come from that background. I was an Islamophobe. I hated Muslims. Now I love them. I just love them to death. And so I know the thought processes. I know what's there. And they think Islam is a monolithic religion and ISIS is the theological school for this thing. I mean, really, they just look at the statistics. But what I begin to learn, sometimes I don't want to have them anymore. I'll just be honest with you. I don't want to have the conversations. I'm evangelical, but I'm also in an Episcopal church. I really breathe well there. It's just wonderful people. They're very diverse. They have both conservatives and liberals, and very Christ-centered. But one of the things I remember back in 1994, I was pastoring a church, and it was really growing. We were just growing leaps and bounds. And I noticed that when people of color started attending, I started getting negative reaction from the leadership. Well, it got bad. It got real bad. And they tried to destroy me. And afterwards, someone came to me and said, "You took on forces bigger here." He said, we used to have a chapter of the Klan. And he said, "Let me name names." He named half my leadership. So I had called for a vote of confidence. I didn't know this before this happened. I actually won the vote. And if I had the wisdom I have now when I was 27, I would have probably stayed on, but I did have a slight break. Well, it was a breakdown. Yeah. But I just remember looking at the plaque on the wall for this church, 40 pastors. And I said, not one of them has ever said this is wrong. Not one of them has said this is sin. Not one of them has ever spoken out. I can't, my conscience be that in that school. I have that recording from that message. It's the proudest sermon I ever preached in my life. And I've kept it. It cost me dearly, but I was never so proud, of that moment in time that I stood there. And it created me a lot of problems. It created a lot of heartache, but I've always had this place in my heart to bring diversity together. I mean, that's been very important to me. My mom saved me from racism. I actually wrote a blog about that. And she put that DNA in my heart as a 6-year-old child that this was evil. So I knew even before I came to be a Christ follower that there was exclusion was wrong. And so in one church I pastored, we had a young man. We all thought he was dying of cancer. He was dying of AIDS. And it really shook me. And he said, "You're the only one that knows this. And if you tell anybody in church, they'll hate me." And I had to keep that secret. And I watched him die. You don't think that changed my view of LGBTQ? It just brought to reality that, oh my God, this is a human being. This is someone God, created and loved. And I'm to exclude that and to be unkind and to be cruel is sin. And so, so that's been a big part of my journey, is bringing people together. And it's sometimes I have friends now that have really took the hook line on the QAnon and the other stuff. I mean, it's scary. But the interesting thing is, a lot of them I trained them in building friendships with Muslims. Not one of them hates Muslims. With all this, I mean, it's like it's so in their DNA now. But this violence, and I think it was Rich is talking about, if we don't speak out, churches are preaching violence now. Churches are calling to arms. Conservative leaders are and they're going to the Old Testament, not the teachings of Jesus, to do it. And in my opinion, we have to go with the master, as Christians. That's just what I'm saying. What did he say about war? And they were talking about taking up arms. One was talking about it's time to hang people. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he said, well, I said, Jesus said those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And he said, well, he said that, but he told Peter to take a sword with him. And I wrote back and said, when did Peter ever use it? I said, it's got to mean something else. When did Peter use the sword? When did the early church, the first 300 years, ever take up the sword? When did they were pacifists? And it educated for a moment. It brought down, because what I'm learning in that group, if you can find reason, if there's someone whose heart is to open to God or open to spirit, in that group, the Bible is actually important. But the key is it more important than this yelling monster that seems to be consuming? And so that's why I keep doing what I'm doing. Everything I write about, I bring it back to Jesus. Okay, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? What would he say about this? And you know what? Everybody knows the answer to that. I mean, you don't have to, or what is God's dream? Another one, if you don't mention Jesus, it's what is God's dream for the world? You know what I mean? You ask that question, you can ask it to a person in junior high, they can tell you. I have an atheist friend. I asked him one time, I said, what do you think if God's dream is for the world? And he goes, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I said, well, let's just pretend for a moment that you believe there's something transcendent or there's a God. What do you think his dream for the world would be? Or her dream? And he said, oh, he want to end war. That God would want to end war. That God would be kind. That God would end human trafficking, poverty. We know in our DNA because of his transcendence. And so, yeah, I forgot what the question was, but I hope that helped.
Well, thank you for your. I mean, the question was why have the conversations? And
yeah. Well, I've seen many people change. I've seen people over time just hanging out with them just gently, and once they saw me change, that's been the big one. Once they saw me change, they didn't know what to do with that. Yeah.
I see a question already. We're a little earlier than we were going to open up Q&A, but sure, I'm down. I may tag back in with some other questions, but Rajuvat, I see your hand raised. Please go ahead and unmute, ask us your brief question. And we'll
Thank you very much. I love that last presentation. And since we're talking about Christians and Muslims, I got a couple of questions, brief questions. One is there's a program called the Abraham Path. I don't know if you guys have heard about it, but people are walking all around the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in the name of Abraham.
Yeah, awesome.
And since Abraham represents in all three religions.
Exactly.
So they've been doing some wonderful work. It was started by William Ury from Harvard, who lives here in Boulder. I've not yet to meet him, but he lives here in Boulder. So I wanted to share that. The other question I had for you, Jeffrey, is, sir, when you, for example, if we would look at a situation like in Kashmir, where there's conflict between Muslims and Hindus, how would the Christian approach work when there's conflict in a conflict zone? I've talked to people over there, and they didn't even know that the International Day of Peace existed.
Wow.
Yeah. So, go ahead, please.
That is a very good question. And, so I prefer not to call it the Christian approach, but the Jesus approach, the love your neighbors yourself. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be to him, he acknowledges all this. And the Quran has so much to say about Jesus. I mean, it's amazing. And the commonality we have. And we might, I've said before, going to Kashmir in a moment, that if you read the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, they're the exact opposite of ISIS. If you read them, you know what I'm saying? It's unbelievable how the ISIS ideology. And so I wrote an article one time that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be to him, showed up today. There are a lot of Muslims that would try to kill him. And so, they would because they're so far from what he envisioned and dreamed. But in a place like Kashmir, it's going to be, it's a spiritual and political battleground, ethnic battleground. The peace process, there may be martyrs. Do you know what I'm saying? Sometimes you have people going in to do God's work of peace, and they get killed or they get martyred. And that's why we have to keep coming. And I think there's some wonderful peacemakers. Some of them are Muslims, Christians, and some are I hate to use the word secular, but let's just say I don't know what you'd say, non-religious, that are awesome. They still believe in love. They love the people. But there's going to be martyrs going in, I think, trying to offer peace. But in a place like that, what I would want to do, like Kabul, I have thoughts on that. And I'm not saying that, but they would work necessarily. But I would want to know who the players are, and I would want to get onto the grassroots and just start to build a relationship within myself, start talking. Okay, what does it mean to be a Hindu? Really, what does it mean at your core to be a Hindu? What does it mean to be a Muslim? And in light of your faith, what is this proper spiritual response to each other,
Yeah.
and begin there. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And then let God unfold it. But I'll tell you one thing, there can be no peacemaking without food. You know what I mean? I'm telling you, it's got to be around food, because it's hard to eat with your enemies. And once you start eat, go ahead, my friend.
That's what the Abraham path does, because when they walk, somebody when they're walking on the path like they did in Jordan, Syria, and different places, somebody offers them food, and they sit together and they eat.
Yeah,
and that's what opens up the conversation about the word Abraham.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I think that's right on, brother. I really do. I think that's.
I did want to ask you a follow-up to that question, because you mentioned Hindus. I grew up in Hindu. I converted to Christianity, and now I'm bringing the Christian approach to this Kashmir situation. I'm in the peacemaking process.
That's awesome.
Yes, I'm what they call a peace designer. I never heard that word before, but someone called me that. So I'm creating a virtual reality reconciliation platform to help these people come together, because at one time they were brothers and sisters. They all lived together. They enjoyed each other's culture. They celebrated in each other's ways. And so I'm trying to create that in a virtual reality setting from the past to show how it was to recreate the feeling, because people's neurological paths have to be recreated.
Absolutely.
To be able to see what's possible.
Yeah, man. That gives me chills. That's brilliant. Yeah, I just love that.
Thank you so much, Roger, for sharing that story.
Thank you. I'll be in touch with you guys on LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah, I'd love that.
Look forward to it. Raj's story and something that you were saying there too, Jeff, makes me think that all three of you are working really closely with particular denominations or sets of denominations. I guess my question for you is where is the work, if at all, with the increasing numbers of religious nuns and atheists, nuns, N-O-N-E-S.
Yeah.
And the atheists among us.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I'm trying right now to see how I can enhance that, because I have a YouTube channel. It's most of my subscribers are Muslim on my channel. There's some Christians too, but atheists, I've been very surprised by the response of atheists to this stuff. And they'll say, I may not believe in God, but I believe in everything else you're saying. I'm in. Some of them said, can we join you? I mean, I don't even have I work with a wonderful organization called Common Ground Consultants, but I don't have a personal organization, and maybe people tell me you need to have something. Maybe I do, but they're asking, how can I join you? How can I do this? And I've had atheists, that have just been, some have been my biggest cheerleaders in things. I went to university and spoke recently. No, I'm sorry, about 8 months before the pandemic. I'm lost on time now. And I just spoke. It was a religion. It was an inclusivity class. And I started talking about atheists. I said, atheists that I know, there's two types of atheists. There's militants atheists that are just kind of like the screamers. They're bitter at religion and God and Christianity. And I understand the pain, trauma, but they're stuck there. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of people stuck. And then there's others on this other side that are saying, I've been hurt, but I really want to build a better world. I don't want to, I want to be an atheist. There has been I found one organization, Atheists for Jesus. I was so shocked to hear this. And, but I spoke at this university, and these three young ladies came up and said, thank you for being so kind to us. And, said, we feel discriminated against, and said, one young lady said, can we join? They said, can we join you? and she said, I go on mission trips with churches just to help people, but I don't believe in God. And I just began to hear they want so much, but then I was at another church speaking, and this young lady, maybe 20, they're young. They're very young. About 22 came up to me, and because I was going to Sudan to try to get this hostage release. And they said, she goes, sign me up. How do I get involved? And I thought, what do you mean? I want to join. I want to be a part of whatever it is you're doing. And I said, oh, are you a member of this church? No, I'm an atheist. And said, I'm just here today with my friend. But I said, well, this church is really behind what I'm doing. Well, if they're for this, I might join it. As an atheist. So we got to give a bigger story. Young people today, nuns have kind of cut the crap out. They're kind of like, I am not going to go listen to a sermon that's going to guilt and shame me and tell me who to vote for, and is going to be so kind and exclusive, to people, and not even deal. It's interesting. People in a lot of churches get so upset about the LGBTQ issue. I'm talking about conservative churches, but the Bible speaks thousands of times about the poor. You see a problem there? What if we really went to the Bible? What is God? On a large scale, what really meant? Well, the poor. But why is it we don't do that? And so they're wanting that. They said, if God's got to be better than this. And so I'm working on that, Allison, I'm really, because I really have a heart for that. And I think they get it. I think they want to make a difference, and they just want to, but they don't want to be, they're not going to be loyal to just institutions and things. Yeah.
Jeff, it's so funny because I am a recovering angry atheist myself.
I understand.
As it happens, I was sitting on a bench at a pep rally on my freshman year of high school, and this girl that I call Carrie Ringer leans over to me and she goes, "Try reading the Bible, bitch." Which was particularly striking. Yeah. And but not otherwise unusual in my daily life, because I was the village atheist in my Bible Belt town. It shaped my life, and I ended up getting a PhD in early Christian history, and wondering how did these people get so screwed up? Yeah, I just don't understand. And turns out I got that doctorate from the Catholic University of America, and I am not Catholic. Wow. So it's been an interesting journey. Yeah. I do this work basically trying to make sure that nobody is made to feel the way that I was made to feel.
Absolutely. Well,
because it's, the worst thing that was going to happen to me is I was going to get beat up in the hallways, and that is not the worst thing that happens to people in our America today. And Martin, I just saw you unmute. Please go ahead.
Well, when we talk about the nuns, they're, again, many subcategories of nuns. There are people who still believe in God and the Bible, but they're not going to follow the institution. And then there are people who are atheists who walk away from everything, and many versions in between. And I think what most have in common is they have looked at the institution, the religious institution of the church, and have said, whatever that is, it's not meeting my needs. It's not addressing life as I understand it. My experience doesn't match what the doctrines that are being taught, or it might not even be doctrines, just the cultural interpretation of the church. So we find ourselves sort of standing on the edge of evangelical world and noting many of the same things and saying, let's shift our gaze to, Jeff talks about being Jesus centric, or shift our gaze back to what Jesus taught us, and let's see if we can find a better way to do that. But when you challenge the power structures, I hate to frame church life as power structures, but at its core, that's sort of what's going on. You have a group that's motivated for some reason. Their identity is wrapped up in this institution, and others on the edge saying, I think we're missing something here. And when you start questioning the institution, you become a threat to the institution, and they begin to isolate you or push you out. So one of the roles, one of the ways we see peace catalysts stepping into this is to find, maybe they do self-identify as a nun, maybe they still identify as an evangelical, or maybe they tried to move into the progressive churches or the denominational mainline churches, but try to find these people who are trying to follow the ways of Jesus, pursue peace, pursue transcendence and mutual thriving, and provide a community for them. Because this, as Rich and Jeff and all of us have noted, it can be lonely when the core group says you don't measure up, and they start trying to isolate you. But there are enough of us. I'm encouraged by the people who are asking the questions. Some people talk about deconstructing, deconstructing some of the things that we've been taught. I think of it more as maturing. You observe more things, you observe reality and try to match it with what you've been taught, and you find a better way to walk. We want to find those people and reorient them toward the pursuit of shalom. We've just written a position paper on what we mean by shalom, the mutual thriving of all, not just the absence of violence.
Right.
I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm going to seek your thriving. Jesus, or the New Testament, talks about the restoration of all things. And if we were to frame that, look at Genesis, 1 and 2 and 3, and the perfection that was there, the garden, the harmony between men and God, men and nature, men and women. And, you get in a couple of chapters in, you've got Cain and Abel in a religious dispute that they end up killing each other over how they interpret religion, or one, Cain kills Abel. And then it moves into them hoarding resources and building cities. And, if this person's avenged 7 times and me 70 times, 7, and you have all of these, the pursuit of shalom, I think, is to address all of those things in a way where we can thrive together. So we want to find the nuns, find the people on the edge of the community, the people who are asking questions, and give them something else to orient their life around. We still think that's Jesus-centric. We still think that can be found in religion, but also acknowledging a lot of the problems that we've already noted.
Right.
Thank you, Martin. Rich, I want to turn to you in a moment, but first point out that Liz and Peter in the chat noted that for Jeff, all the people who come to you asking how to join, if you don't have an organization form, Martin does.
Yeah, that's right.
Send them over.
I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We want them.
So Rich, so much of your work is to work with younger folks. And you talk in your chapter about just the struggle sometimes to get those folks in the door because it is a church. So would you like to tag in on this question?
Yeah, I did mention in mine that the biggest barrier, I said to people, what's the biggest barrier for you to come to church? And they said church. That is the biggest barrier because they have such a negative view of it. I love the nuns. I love the atheists. I think they're awesome. They're questioning. And just literally last Sunday, that's my population. That's who's coming in. And to rephrase the theology of our tradition in a similar way that was said tonight, I would say the only way you can love God is to love your neighbor. If you're loving your neighbor, you're loving God. If you don't believe in God, who really cares? But you have to love your neighbor. And I find a lot of the atheists, when I say it to them that way, to an atheist or to a nun, it's about the life that you lead. Are you seeking to be more compassionate and less selfish? That's what it comes down to.
That's right.
And that's and I would say that the teachings of Jesus in my life have given me that those insights, those teachings are still valuable. They're still interesting. What's fun about, for me, the atheists and the nuns who, when they come to church, for example, there's no common knowledge of the Bible. So when I say something, they're like, last week you said it was from the Gospel of Mark. This week it's the Gospel of John. Why are there two Gospels? I said, well, there's actually four. Why do you say Old Testament, New Testament? Why do you say, was Moses in the time of Jesus? Did Jesus go to Rome? Just very basic questions. And all questions are good, but they don't have a common understanding of Scripture. I think that's healthy. And I did name my chapter The Future of Church. I think old church, as it's been known for a while, is dying. And I think it's very clear. And something new is being reborn. And I think we'll be in this peacemaking work. It will be in this people willing to risk their lives to go into situations or risk their reputations to make peace with people who are different than them. That's really the future of it. And when you talk in those terms to nuns or to atheists, young people that I meet, they're excited about that. That's what they want to do. They want to have meaning and purpose. My only caveat to the nuns that I'm working with is that they've been so fed a diet of individualism in America that you can just have your own spiritual path and kind of create it on your own and do your own thing. I do think there's a very important role of community, and that's very hard for them. I've invited, like I say, if you're going to come to the community group, it's not always about you. It's about the other people in the group who might benefit from it. So there is something about community that I think we're very lonely, and I think that that's a place that faith communities can provide for people, a place to belong. So I don't think you can do it just alone, but I find that they're wonderful, and I think they're reinventing church, and I think they'll be the future. Allison, you had an experience in your life where you were one thing, and now you're something else. And I had a woman just on Sunday say, do you think I could ever be a person of faith again? I've been an atheist my whole life. That's a beautiful question. That's a wonderful question. She says, because I can't do it alone anymore. The problems in my life are too big. I need something bigger than myself. That's a great opportunity to move into a new role. But I think certainly not judging people who would be in those, say I'm an atheist or a nun or whatever. You just got to love people where they're at, and they'll see that and come along.
It's a beautiful story. Yeah, Ibrahim, I was just going to say we should open up for questions, and here you are.
Well, just three highlights that I picked as our speakers were touching on an array of very connected yet, relevant issues, each one being a different compartment by itself. One is, let me borrow a concept from some intra-Muslim conversations. Maybe it's not limited to that, but that's where I saw it. Theological deprivation. So there is this deficit that is opening the space for those sharp interpretations that doom us to kind of a false dichotomy, which is you are either open to engaging with others or anchored in your faith. But that's not an either or thing. That's something that we need to bridge. That's what Rumi did.
Yes.
being a legalist, a jurist himself, and being a mystic at the same time. He did bridge build the two realms, and he bridge built the people. So when I talk about Sufism, I say they are Muslims without borders. So we here all our speakers are those border transgressors. They are path breakers, because the remedy is to break down this false dichotomy of you're either committed to your faith or open to engagement with others. So many of the insights that I've been hearing for almost an hour already boil down to these remedies of how to end the theological deprivation. And thanks to all of our speakers for bringing real life experiences about how this can be done.
Mm.
Ibrahim, do we have other questions from the group? While you are coming up with questions, I will shamelessly share 2 resources from the Inclusive America Project. And what we do, the first here is a report called the Rebuilding Democracy Project, which is a case study of a sonnet written by a synagogue in Northern Virginia, where they they essentially applied many of their worship practices of textual study and hymn singing and saying to each other, I hear you. They say shamati, I hear you, to the difficult conversations that we've been talking about. It's a really beautiful program. Feel free to check that out. And the second piece is a book written by Esma Uddin, who is a religious liberty lawyer. And she's been running this project with us here at the Inclusive America Project for the last I guess it's been 2 years. It's been 2 years, called The Politics of Vulnerability. She's doing a lot of research on the things that we've been talking about today, including what it means to be a peacemaker. Martin's holding up a copy for us. Thank you, Martin.
Yeah.
Including what it means to be a peacemaker, and that if you are a peacemaker, you are often the first people targeted by your own community, because you are kind of swimming against the stream there, and how physically dangerous it can be to do that peacemaking work. So Roger, I see that you have a question. If you can hop in briefly, and we'll see who else has one after you as well.
Okay, thanks, Allison. I'm just wondering, have any of the panelists looked into how the process of the brain changes with people of faith and people who don't have faith? The only reason I ask this is because it seems that there's a lot of talk right now about the neocortex brain and all that, the amygdala, and what happens to the brain. And so if you're in a fight or flight state and you're in a conflict zone, you're operating out of one part of your brain. But if you're able to meditate, be at peace, be still, access those other places, then you obviously have more tools. So I just wanted to get some comments on that from you guys. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was awesome.
Yeah. I think that the brain science that you're talking about is, the religious field's finding it. It comes out of the psychological field. We know it's real. We know that our thoughts become things. Our thoughts affect our destiny. Our thoughts affect whether we can move on and whether we stay stuck. And people like in war zones, that fight or flight, that's all they know. You know what I'm saying? So their whole thought process is survival, often. And yet you'll find people there who still love and who still are able to find joy in life. But yeah, I think it's very important. I think when we read the New Testament, it's Jesus, Paul, they were all about changing the way we see things. And the whole concept of repent, when we say Jesus said repent, all he meant was change the way you're thinking about God, change the way you're thinking. And so there's this need for, I've been looking this way, I need to change my way of thinking. And that takes time. That's something that has to be affirmed daily. And gratitude, one of the biggest ways to change your mind is gratitude. I have this practice I've started where every hour I'll set my timer and write down something I'm grateful for. And I'm telling you, by the end of it sounds like, oh my gosh, that's laborious. By the end of my day, my whole day was transformed. And I'm starting to do these practices like this, and all of a sudden you just start seeing the world in a whole different light. And I think with what you're trying to do with your project, you're giving them through that virtual, you're showing them a life that's been forgotten. Do you know what I mean? Their brains need, and I would love to stay in touch with you, by the way. You're trying to show them, hey, we were all friends once, and here's what it looks like. And what's happening right now is not really God or transcendence best for us. But look at what it used to like. Can we go back? Can we start now again? What do we need to do? Whose help do we need? So I hope that helps with your question. Let's say.
I will quickly add a plug for this book, Fingerprints of God by Barbara Bradley Haggerty. It came out about a decade ago. She was, I believe she's retired now. She was a religion reporter for NPR. Hide my mess again. But it's just a great book, and she's investigating, what happens to your brain if you pray regularly.
Oh my gosh,
it's really fascinating.
Can you put that in the chat by any chance?
Yeah,
I'd like to get a hold of that
book.
book.
A link to it. And Martin, yeah, I see you ready to go.
The whole area of cognitive research is just so fascinating. I grew up in churches that were highly suspect of anything that pretended to be psychology or social sciences. But the cognitive research is moving beyond that to physical parts of our brain and how they respond. Who was it? Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, is a foundational work in this. He starts off with the illustration of the elephant and the rider, and who's really in control of it. And we were doing I've forgotten the name of the research institute that was exploring the idea of introducing cognitive dissonance as a way to force people. We're hardwired to resolve cognitive dissonance. So if you can make people realize that they are acting inconsistently with their beliefs, we're hardwired to resolve that. Now we can resolve it in a negative way, and we just lock down and I'm going to go to the dark side, so to speak, or we can begin to ask better questions. Do you have time for an illustration? I don't want to dominate.
We have about 3 minutes before I'll turn it back over.
The illustration's too long, so another time.
Rich, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing, thank you, Allison. The only thing I'd say to that question is that forgiveness, the ability to forgive others, a desire to put yourself in difficult situations for the good of the other person, those are not natural things.
Right.
Being tribal is natural. That's our evolution, right, as Martin had pointed out earlier. And so I say, but by the grace of God, we have that ability to do those things, to forgive, to rush into a situation to help others before we help ourselves, to risk for a cause greater than ourselves. And so the question throughout tonight was, what's the role of faith? Without faith, I couldn't do the piecework I've done my whole life. It's given me the courage. It's given me the power. It's an energy beyond myself. People who do it and they do without faith, I'm always amazed and respectful of. But it is not natural. It is not. We can see how the brain was organized to protect us, and the things that we're doing from a faith perspective transcend that, and that's the beauty of faith for me.
Well said, Rich.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a great note, actually, to turn it back over to Ibrahim to close us out.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to close with a personal story. I'm a Cold War kid, so we were watching the performance of this country from way other end of the world, and for a number of years we had American teachers in my school, who were teaching the same subjects with their local peers, but what we always recall with my high school peers, high school friends, is the way that we felt valued, elevated, reinforced when we were having those hallway conversations, because you could talk everything with them easily. So, speaking about barriers and fears and, sometimes self-censoring ourselves and or pushing others into corners where they end up self-censoring themselves, which leads to even further destruction, rather than this time just being invisible from a visible form of destruction. So these are foreign things to this country's culture, and as a newcomer into this country, I think was able to observe this very powerfully, the richness very powerfully through an earlier phase of life, what this culture of deliberation can achieve, how it can reinforce individuals tremendously, is one of the gifts of this country. And again, it is those border transgressors like you all who are helping this one to survive and also to advance. So it's a dynamic thing. It will need to change form and shape, not the spirit, but to remain relevant.
Yes.
So that this what I was borrowing from this intra-Muslim debate of theological deprivation does not become a fault line, to swallow the gifts and the coherence. So I thank everyone for this great conversation, to our panel, to our moderators, to all of the participants for being with us. So please do follow our updates, and I will be just dropping the links of the book that brought us together this evening, and the work our speakers do. So just a brief announcement. Our next book conversation, the recent ones are being in person, will be in Washington, D.C. on the 9th. I encourage everyone to look into the Rumi Forum website to find more details. And it's going to be about people of the book, a history of Muslim-Christian engagement and interfaith dialogue. Please check out our announcements, and we'll look forward to seeing you all there on the 9th. That's again in Washington, D.C. So again, heartfelt thanks to everyone, and looking forward to continuing the conversation in this platform or others. Stay well.
Stay well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you to the Rumi
Thanks,
Forum.
Al.
Oh yeah, thank you guys. It was great. Enjoyed
Nice
it.
job, Allison.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Friends.
Bye-bye.